Hello and welcome to the Apex Podcast, the weekly conversation with the titans and tastemakers of the automotive world. Custodian, which is the business that powers this podcast, has just launched car insurance designed for enthusiasts. So if you're an existing Custodian user, you can apply for car insurance directly through the platform 24/7. And if you're not yet a Custodian user, sign up for free and check it out. Right, on with today's episode. So today I'm joined by Justin Lunny. He's the CEO of Everrati, a company that specialises in electrifying iconic cars from the past. We haven't talked too much about EVs on this podcast, so it'll be very interesting to learn more about what Everrati are up to. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
It's our pleasure. Thanks for coming along. There will be people listening that are familiar with what Everrati does, but for those that aren't, what is Everrati all about?
So thank you. So Everrati has been formed to both redefine some incredible iconic cars, and I guess you might describe it as the back book really of some of the most fantastic automotive brands out there and marks out there. So you see today some of our cars, you see the Porsche 964, you see the Land Rover series, GT40, which has been quite incredible, and also the Pagoda. But what ties all those together really is firstly they're icons of automotive, but they're also in the main part of a series of vehicles clearly that then evolve from there. So because of the technology we're using that's in-house developed, we then have plans clearly to do a number of other vehicles on that sort of format. And what we find is that some people love what we do. Some people aren't so sure. Less people hate what we do, thankfully. In the early days, there was, certain firing squads, I think, ready for us. But once they really get what we do and why we do it, it's a bit more acceptable and very enjoyable, certainly.
Yes. And as far as I understand, you and your team, you are real car enthusiasts.
We're real car enthusiasts. We are also, so my background is actually in tech, but, whenever I could justify or do the man maths, I'd always buy a car with whatever spoils of success. But also the team. The team is ex Rolls-Royce, Bentley, JLR, McLaren, Rimac, Singer, Lotus. So you name it. The team is some of the best engineering talent in the industry, and that's really what drives us always is to create the best cars we can.
And what sparked your personal interest in cars?
Cars, good grief. It's a great question, isn't it? I can't remember ever not loving cars, I guess is the reality. My uncle, who unfortunately just passed away, but he was always massively into cars, and it was always the thing that he and I ever spoke about, or I'd go out for a drive with him in one of his cars, back in the day. Just the beauty, the aesthetics, the power, everything about them. No doubt we'll come on to sound shortly, which clearly is slightly different with an EV, but it's kind of that engagement you have with something that is beautiful, quite frankly. So that's really how I got into cars, I guess.
And was there a sort of defining moment when you were like, right, I'm going to go and start a company that combines classic cars with EVs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, as I said, my background is actually tech and fintech. So I've built and sold a couple of companies in that space. And as I say, my passion was always cars. So it kind of made sense to try and adapt that love of cars with the understanding of technology, I suppose, and try and gel that in some way, shape or form. I've also got kids, and I've got kids who also love cars, but the way the world is going, finding a way of enjoying those vehicles in a way that is zero emissions and clean air and all the other things that go with it was really important to me, and that's really been the ethos behind where we're going with this.
And you just sort of alluded to the sound just a moment ago. I mean, I guess a part of the resistance towards sort of electrification is the argument that you sort of lose the soul of the car a bit when you take away the noise. From my understanding, that's a big deal for you guys. You want to retain the character as best you can. Right. How are you managing to do that?
So look, sound is so interesting, but what I would say is, probably deal with that slightly separately. What I'd say is that we try and keep our cars as analog as possible. So yes, sound is part of being analog. The other part is its drivability, its weight distribution, how it corners, how it reacts to certain inputs. So that really is as important to us as sound. And actually, the feedback we've had from a number of journalists has actually been, our cars are the most analog EVs out there, number one, which is great. Number two, what I would say is that, even the likes of Richard Hammond in various podcasts sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago have said people won't actually miss the sound of a V8 once they get used to an EV. And I think, for me personally, I'm now, I think, on about 60,000 miles in 3 Taycan Turbo S's as my daily driver over the last 2.5 years. And that has sport sound. I think I've used it less than 5% of the time I've driven the car, because you don't really need it. It's got the performance, it's got everything else. So I think, so it's there. There are sound packages that we offer, which interestingly are the same tech as you would have if you bought, let's say, a BMW 1 Series with a sport button. It's the same. It's basically synthetic sound. So we can add that to our cars, but most of our clients haven't today, and because they just want it as an EV and enjoy what it is as a car in its new world, I suppose.
What's actually involved in converting these cars from sort of a mechanical engineering side of things? How does it work?
Yeah. So we very much use the term redefine. So we are redefining these cars as an EV as opposed to just converting them. The reason I mention that, I guess, is that there are people out there that will just stick batteries and motors in your, Landy or whatever it might be, and that's perfectly fine. The difference, I guess, is, however, what that's not necessarily doing is considering overall weight distribution, drivability, balance, and all the elements that we think are really important in that original vehicle. So that to us is what's really important. So when it comes to what we do, we take a car all the way back to the chassis. So, for example, with the Pagoda we're launching this year, that's gone all the way back to the chassis. It's 3D scanned as a chassis, so we have everything in CAD. Then we computer engineer a entirely new powertrain, and we worry about weight. We worry about weight distribution. We worry about performance, so that when you look at that car, yes, you'll notice it hasn't got an exhaust pipe, but outside of that, it's identical to an original. And in terms of drivability, I think we've got some really great stats, but that car really will probably drive very similar to, say, a mechatronic Pagoda. Our Porsche is driving, I'm not going to say the same as a Singer because it's very different, but it has the performance certainly of that vehicle. So really, I suppose with an Everrati, what we're doing is that overlay on cars that people already adore, and bringing them into a world where they can still be fully enjoyed, as opposed to a step back. We're always looking to evolve them forward, but the tech we use is the best in class, and it's all then about, my engineers are people that have worked for JLR on testing these vehicles to the extreme, and those are the sorts of things. We were recently in Vermont in deepest, darkest winter testing one of our Land Rovers. That's the difference, I suppose, with us, is that we're going to those levels to really make sure that these cars are fit for purpose and enjoyable.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention that. The 964 that you do, isn't that lighter than the original when you're done with the conversion?
Yeah, it is. It's so, and don't get me wrong, there's some trickery there. In other words, a lot of carbon fibre. So 964 is an interesting one. We, as you'll know, there are people out there that will sell you a kit for a 964. But I think, again, what we've done with that is we've really considered the balance and the weight. So, and we've added things like trick suspension, so fully adjustable electronic suspension. But that particular model that we do, certainly the wide body vehicle, that's actually built at a company called Aria in Irvine, California. Not many people know, but Aria built the first around 150 Singer Porsches for Singer. So the very same company building our Porsches is the same company that built a big number of the Singers that are on the road. So what they don't know about lightning and kind of making a 964 special is not worth knowing, really. So that's why we do the business in the way that we do. So we work with best-in-class builders that aren't actually available to the general public. They're more of a B2B supply. But yeah, our Porsche is about, it depends on the specification, but up to 40 kilos lighter than the original, with a lot more power and things like, adjustable suspension and what have you. So it's kind of, if you were to drive it, I suppose it's probably it's almost in the middle of driving a Taycan and a 964, if that makes sense. And you'll have to come and try it out.
I haven't driven either of those. so I think I wanted to go and try it out. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, and I understand as well that the car can be reverted back to standard spec. Is that right?
Yeah. So again, this is part and parcel, I suppose, of being my engineers are all automotive, but also because we're based in the UK, and it's slightly different in other countries, especially in the US. Because we're based in the UK, there's a lot of rules around what you can and can't do with a vehicle, things like cutting the chassis and other things. But also for us, it's really important that it is technically reversible. It's highly unlikely that our clients will ever reverse it. But I think at the moment we're not doing holy grail cars. The wide body 964 and all of them to date have all started life as a lowly Tiptronic, 2 or 4, and therefore they were pretty unloved in the first place. And we've given them an entirely new life, and now they look amazing and they drive amazing. But at some point, and we've had this already, we've got clients that are saying, actually, could you do me a really, almost not one-off, but a special car? And for us, because again, we love cars, we would never do that unless we knew it could be reversed, because if it is matching numbers, it has some value already. Being able to actually take that forward into the future, when they sell the car or hand it down to their family, it's still matching numbers. It's just that the original engine is not in the car. Saying that, you go to Goodwood and see a 250 driving around, probably that's not the original engine either. So there's a race spec engine and there's an original engine. So very similar principles, really. So for road use, you use your EV, and maybe at some point it might be transferred back to combustion.
I guess another part of why this is quite appealing for some people is also the maintenance costs. It might be a bit tricky to sort of go into the real details. It's quite subjective between different cars, but how do the maintenance costs compare between an internal combustion 964 and your 964, for example? Yeah,
I guess what I would say is I don't want to knock 964s. They're pretty reliable in the first place, right? But what I would say is that when our clients are really split, so either they are out and out car guys and girls, or they are tech or the sustainability or a mixture of those. But what I would say as well is a couple of our clients use their cars as their dailies. There's a guy driving around San Francisco. This is his daily car. There's a lady in London. This is her daily Land Rover. And I think what we'd say is that, yes, by definition, an EV is far more reliable, a tenth of the moving parts, frankly, of a combustion engine car. Not to say that they'll never go wrong, but it's a very, very reliable vehicle to run. And then it's things like no congestion charge, no ULEZ charge, and depending on where you are in the world, that's important, or maybe it isn't. But certainly, people buy them probably for different reasons than you might think, I guess.
And what's the range on the batteries? How long do the batteries last? And also, I've always wondered, can the batteries be used for anything else, like post car life?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So again, one of the ethos, I suppose, of Everrati, because we're doing the entire car. We're not just selling a kit. So when somebody comes to us, we will help them source the donor. It'll be entirely stripped down to the chassis and then rebuilt as a new vehicle. Because everything we do is in CAD and CAD engineered, it also means that we have upgradability through the life of the car. So, poor old me, I've got a brand new Taycan, but the next version's just come out. I can't probably upgrade my Taycan. I have to go and buy a new Taycan. Whereas what we do is actually offer upgrade paths within our vehicles. So you've just spent your money on this incredible car. Maybe in 2 years' time, the battery technology has moved on, which it no doubt will have done. And we will offer, and we already have done, a couple of upgrades on existing vehicles today. So that kind of sustainability message is true, which is, it's a 30-odd-year-old vehicle. we're already giving it a second life, and now we're extending that forward. What I would say, just to answer your question, so on our Porsche, it's around 200 miles, just over if you're careful. There's a couple of things to say. One is that we can do things like vehicle to home or vehicle to grid. So actually, if you don't use your car so much, the energy stored in the car could be used in your home. So that's quite an interesting opportunity there. So if you've got solar, if you've got other forms of energy storage in your home, and then absolutely once the sort of natural life of that battery in a car has diminished, but it's unlikely, if I'm honest, in the use case that we have, but people might. Yeah. That battery is still very much usable in things like home energy storage, or a lot. There's a number of big battery recycling companies popping up now as well.
Okay, yeah. And what's the sort of build? I always wonder as well the build time on these cars. If I wanted one, how long do I have to wait?
Yeah, good question. So we've got right now, I think we've got 12 cars in build, but we're distributed. So as I say, Aria in California build most of our Porsches today. We've launched our ST. That's a different builder, but again, there's productionization there. Land Rovers, again, we have a different partner here in the UK. Mercedes, we have a different partner. So in essence, we're not backed up in one facility, but something like a Porsche right now is about 9 months.
And obviously, in terms of pricing as well, I mean, they're not cheap, but
no.
You're targeting the sort of luxury end of the market.
That's
Do you think
right.
that prices will come down as the technology becomes more readily available?
Yeah, do you know what? I think it's a good question. I think for us, how can I answer that fairly? I suppose you could argue if you go to Singer, because they've done more of them, they can do them more cheaply, but they're not reducing their prices. And, so I think there's a space in the market for doing things really, really well. Now, by definition, however, Moore's law is that technology will evolve and actually increase, and you'll get better tech. But generally speaking, you'll just get more for your money, generally, yes, I think. Okay. So you'll get, whether it's 200-mile range, you might get 220, 240, 260 or whatever. So I think generally speaking, that's what will happen. And certainly with us, we do see reduction in battery prices, but actually what we tend to do is then go for an even bigger, capacity. So it really depends on the proposition. Some of the cars we've got in development right now, however, are going to be significantly more than we're doing today, because they're using tech from the Lotus Evera, they're using tech from the Rimac Nevera, using tech from some really, some of the best cars, EV cars certainly on the road today.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess obviously the technology is constantly evolving. Another sort of, concern that I had, and I'm not fully well versed in this, but the way that the raw materials are extracted, the actual making of the batteries, the mining of the lithium, is that improving as well? What's the sort of...
So look, I think there's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt created by media on that. What I would say is two things. First of all, if you look at the mines and the like, it's far more likely that actually they're extracting gold than lithium when it comes to human rights issues. Certainly all of the battery companies that are of any status have full traceability on where that lithium comes from, and it certainly doesn't come from those mines. So that's the first thing I'd say. As I say, secondly, it's more likely to be gold that anybody might be wearing or using in computer chips or using in other technology. And then I will say it, there are keyboard warriors out there talking about this that don't realise that they're on a mobile phone which has exactly the same tech. And people say, but the battery in the phone is tiny. 5 billion mobile phones are thrown away every single year, most of those to landfill. So the argument that not only phones but laptops, everything we have is lithium batteries. So I think it's an easy one to point at EVs, but actually it's generally either A, untrue, or B, everybody's using these devices unfortunately already anyway. It's just that in a different form.
And what's your sort of view on the way that the EV market will progress over the next few years? I get more generally,
There are a number of points. I think if you look at EVs in the USA, we're on a technology adoption curve at the moment, and I forget the exact stats, but I think EV adoption in the USA, for example, in the last since 2019, I think the stat is it's grown by 348%. So it's that standard EV, it's technology adoption curve. And yes, there'll be bumps in the way, but it's still growing. What I think is really interesting is that, brands such as Rolls-Royce, 100% EV, Volvo, 100% EV, JLR will be going 100% EV. So this is happening. The train is definitely left the station. The fact that Macan, the Porsche Macan, which is one of Porsche's most popular cars, is now only EV. So there'll be people that push it away, but actually this is happening anyway. And really, what I would say is that there'll be more and more really exciting products out there. There'll be really cool stuff. I think the big challenge, if I'm honest, for the more established manufacturers is, unfortunately, like it or not, there's a plethora of Chinese cars coming through, different brands that nobody's ever heard of, quite frankly, and they will start to flood the market. And I think that's the only challenge, which is that a lot of Western manufacturers have kind of been asleep at the wheel on EV and been pushing it away. I just hope not too many are lost along the way, because they, by definition, haven't really had the products available for people to buy at the right price.
It's interesting. So we've interviewed some people in the motorsport world as well. So the other week we did an interview with Patrick Peter, the guy behind the Le Mans Classic and the Peter Auto, and
lovely guy.
Yeah, really interesting guy. And he was talking about the grid for the Le Mans Classic is moving towards, I think the last one, it was 30% was running on sustainable fuels, and that's quite a hot topic in the historic motorsport space. The revival mandating it as well.
Yeah.
Is synthetic fuels a rival to EV? What's the sort of
so
play there?
I would say everything has its place. So synthetic fuel, hydrogen in certain environments. Not currently in cars, if I'm honest. And the stats probably show that the whole VHS Betamax war has already been won by EV. But that's not to say never say never. I would say on sustainable fuels, the word sustainable is not correct, because it still emits CO2, and the argument is that it's taken out in its remanufacture. It still has air quality issues. It's not for cities. It's basically I think racetracks is basically the perfect environment. And I was asked this question the other day, but even Porsche, who are partnered with an oil company, the volume of sustainable fuel they think they can produce in, I think it's probably 10 years time, 5 to 10 years time, would cover the US's requirement for petrol for a few hours in a single day in a whole year. So it's tiny volumes. But again, we would never say never. I think that it's more, the reality is there's massive air quality issues in many places. Global warming is here. I've not met many people recently that think it isn't. So we have to decarbonise. And I think sustainable fuel is one part. It's a small part, but it's one part for that. And we would always say, if it can be done, but it's in the right environment, then why not? But my personal view is EV is certainly by far won the battle in the mainstream. But saying that, I would never dream of turning something really, really special into an EV, because there are things like a work of art, a Monet. You don't want to cut the corner off just because it doesn't fit in your room. So that there are elements to that, but I think in terms of mainstream, EV is definitely where it's at.
Circling back to what you're doing at Everrati, obviously you have a very comprehensive list of cars that you can do now. You've got your Porsche 964, Defenders, classic Range Rovers. You've got the Pagoda as well. What cars are you looking at doing next? Yeah,
so it's a great question. So I think so what I would say is we never. Okay, how can I describe it? We do have a bespoke program where we put all of our efforts into one different car, but actually in the main we do series of cars. So we do the 964, we do the Land Rover series and Defender, and Pagoda, and obviously GT4 is a bit different because it's a rolling chassis from super forwards. All of those cars have an evolution, of course. So 964, well, what's next? There are 993, 996, 997. Who knows? There's definitely something there. There's also another couple of Porsches, bizarrely, that are currently not necessarily kind of big in terms of this market, but I think we can do something with. So I think for us, it's all about evolution. I think as car enthusiasts evolve and as people desire different things. The story at the moment is if you go to a Concours event, I was at Pebble Beach last year, there's a lot of talk about, the 30s and 40s cars being actually not so interesting because the market for those, the people that wanted to buy them when they could afford them are unfortunately, either having to sell them or no longer with us. And I think, therefore, the car market, as we know, is very cyclical like that. But certainly there are some cars in the pipeline that are really exciting. And putting, so if you think that our GT40 as an example, we've had an F1 engineer helping us tune that car. This is what people don't necessarily know about EVs, is they're just as tunable, if not more tunable than a combustion engine. But there's a lot of work that goes into it. And of course, using that technology and experience into some of these other performance cars is kind of where we're going. So I'd say watch this space. But yeah, lots of evolution of current cars we're doing into something a lot more exciting, I would say. Interesting.
Cool. Well, that sounds great. And I think to wrap up, we normally ask some quick fire questions, a bit more quite lighthearted. I'm interested to know what your favourite electric/hybrid car on the market right now is.
Good grief. I would say, just because it's ridiculous in terms of all the records, it's probably the Evera. That said, if you're looking at hybrid, I think, let's be honest, Koenigsegg have some pretty special products as well. So I can't say I've actually driven either. I've sat in one of them, but I think this is the thing that from a performance perspective, they are unbelievable. And that just, I think, gives the opportunity to do so many different things in that environment. But yeah, those two probably are my favourites today.
Yeah, good answer. Modern cars or classic cars?
Good grief. I've always been suckered into buying modern cars, but I love classics. So I think it's, that whole daily driver versus something that, I because unfortunately I do a lot of miles, I kind of, the modernity of something like the Taycan Turbo S works for me. But saying that, I just love driving. One very brief story. My son, at the beginning of the pandemic, he was 5, he's now just turned 9. I had a Pagoda in my garage alongside Ferraris, a GT3 and a couple of other things. And I had to go and get some bits for the barbecue. It's May 2020, sun's out. Daddy, can we travel in style today? Can we take the Pagoda? And I think that, for me, that says it all, which is, yes, these modern cars are great fun and engaging and have all the mod cons, but there's something special about a classic as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's brilliant. And what would you say is in your dream 3-car garage?
So I love a 275 long nose Ferrari. So they're obviously something quite special there. Weirdly is the wrong word. I love something like a really classic Mercedes, almost like the Take the Hangover car, but of that sort of era. I think is really, really cool. And last but not least, I think, something that is probably a bit out there. I've always loved the likes of, and by the way, I'm not talking practicality here, but I've always loved the BMW M1, so the original BMW M1, which I think, again, it just from a style perspective, not great for hauling kids or dogs around, but yeah, that could be a lot of fun to have those 3 in the garage.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, Justin, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat with us today. It was really interesting to learn more about Everrati and what you're up to. So
absolute pleasure. Yeah, thank you for your time.